All right, let's get going here. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Panther-Lair podcast. Welcome to the weekly podcast. Welcome to the Tuesday night live stream. We appreciate everybody who's checking in and getting ready to hang out with us here. We get together every week, every Tuesday night, 8:30 to tape the podcast. We release a podcast during the week, but we record it Tuesday nights, and we do it live on YouTube. So if you listen to the podcast every week and you enjoy the podcast, but you find yourself wanting to talk back or have some kind of conversation about what I'm saying, or you have a question, if I say something, you want to question that, or you just want to respond to it, this is a good opportunity. This is what's fun about the YouTube live streams. It's not just for you to look at me, because that's not fun. But what it is you can use the comment section and interact and ask questions about Pitt, and we can have a conversation. That's kind of what's nice. And we started doing this before everyone had to stay at home all the time and couldn't go out and go to bars and talk Pitt sports with their friends, but kind of convenient timing because a few weeks after we started doing this, or a month or so after we started doing this, no one was allowed to go to bars anymore to talk about Pitt sports. So you want to talk about Pitt sports, here's a little bit of an opportunity to do it. And so glad to have you on board with the live stream on Tuesday night. And if you're listening to this later in the week, we appreciate listening to it as well. Plenty of things to talk about tonight. Had a bunch of different topics I want to get to, but I want to start off by mentioning what we're drinking tonight, what's on tap tonight. Pretty excited about this. If you're a Pitt fan in Western PA, you probably know this already. Voodoo Brewery up in Meadville. I was about to say I love it in Meadville. I don't love it in Meadville. Nobody loves it in Meadville. No offense, guys. The best thing going on in Meadville is Voodoo Brewery, and we appreciate them 100% because they decided to hook us up a little bit, support the podcast. They're big Pitt fans, as you can see, and you already know this beer if you're a Pitt fan in Western Pennsylvania and you like beer. But if those categories don't apply to you, then you don't know about this. It's the non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA, and it's the name of a beer. Just talking about the name here, I love it and I hate it. And I hate it because of why it has to be called this, and I love it because this is what they came up with as an answer to a difficult situation. If you don't know the story behind non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA, ask the person next to you. Find someone. Someone can explain this to you. I'm not going to do it tonight, but someone can explain it to you because it's great. And it's great that this is what they came up with. You got to like the colors. They are Pitt fans. They're Pitt alums, Pitt supporters, Voodoo Brewery. I think you can. I meant to check this before I started the podcast. I'm pretty sure you can do pickup. If you go to Meadville, I think their stuff is available in some of the spots in Western PA where you can buy beer, if you go around to your Giant Eagle or your distributor or wherever it is, and they might have delivery options as well. Shipping at least. So I apologize. Go to their website. You'll find out how to get these beers and how to get this beer, the Voodoo non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA. And while I love this can, I'm going to leave this can sitting next to me. We're going to pour this thing into a glass tonight because we're going fancy for the Voodoo non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA. And I want to tell you about it real quick. They sent me a paper that says what this beer is. I'm not going to try and explain it to you on my terms. I'm going to use theirs. It's an 8.6% West Coast style IPA brewed with 4 kinds of malted barley and a ridiculous amount of Simcoe hops with 5 kettle additions. I'm reading the paper while I'm pouring this beer and trying not to spill it. I thought I could find somewhere to put it that you could see it during the podcast, but love the can. Now, with 5 kettle additions and 2 dry hops, the nose of the beer is rich in pine and fruit notes with hints of passion fruit and apricot, along with woodsy and floral undertones. I don't know about all that stuff, but I know it's a good beer. There's a lot going on in that beer. That is good. Voodoo Brewery, you got to get up there. Again, I can't recommend a lot of reasons to go to Meadville. I've been to Meadville. I don't think there's a lot of reasons to go to Meadville. Voodoo Brewery is a reason to go to Meadville. So head up there and check that out. Appreciate them supporting the podcast. So you should support them. I certainly am a big fan. So that is cool. One other housekeeping thing to get to that I wanted to talk. I mean, not housekeeping, but sort of a programming note. We've got this podcast we do here on, we release it on Wednesdays. We do this live stream on Tuesday nights. We get the other podcast we release on Friday mornings, usually Fridays, and it's our, conversations podcast where we have a guest. We talk with someone, a Pitt player, Pitt coach, former, current, whatever it is, someone around Pitt. And we started this a few weeks ago. And we started doing it because the radio show, the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan, went on hiatus. And I said, well, I stopped doing 2 podcasts a week because I was doing the radio show. Now that I'm not going to do the radio show, I'll go back to doing a second podcast. I started doing this conversation podcast, this, where we have a guest. We do an interview every week. It's just like a half-hour podcast with an interview, and it's fun. And I've enjoyed doing it. We've been doing it the past few weeks since the radio show went on hiatus. Well, radio show's coming back. This Saturday morning, we'll be back on the air at 93.7 The Fan, 8 a.m. for the Panthers Insider Show. And it's a show on the radio, terrestrial radio, and you can listen to it on radio.com and the radio.com app and all these other ways that you can listen to radio nowadays. But it's, you're driving around in your car on Saturday morning, 8 a.m., tune it to 93.7 The Fan. There's going to be some Pitt talk. And I know Pitt fans always want more Pitt talk on the radio airwaves. Well, this is your show, man. I mean, this is the Pitt show. This is where you can talk Pitt sports, or you can listen to Pitt sports talk. And so pretty excited about that. It'd be exciting to get back on the airwaves at 93.7 The Fan and start talking Pitt sports again. Unless, of course, we go on hiatus again. But we'll do, when they say, hey, man, let's do a radio show, I say, okay, let's do a radio show. And I figure I'm here talking about Pitt all the time anyway, right? We do the podcast, a couple podcasts a week. We do Panther-Lair.com and, put content out all the time there. We're on the message boards all the time at Panther-Lair.com. So what's another hour of radio talk? Might as well get out there and do it. So that's fun. I'm not going to stop doing the second podcast, though. I really kind of enjoyed how those last few that came out. We had Jeff Capel last week. I was really, hopefully you got a chance to check out that podcast where we talked to Jeff Capel about what it's like to recruit in a pandemic. I thought that was a great conversation. Obviously there's about 1 million things you could ask Jeff Capel right now. There's a lot of interesting things to talk to him about with the season, ending relatively recently, and transfers, of guys specifically going out. And, there's some interesting things that you could ask him about. But the thing I was most interested in was, how do you recruit during a pandemic? How do you recruit when you can't go on the road and recruits can't come and visit you? Like, this is a crucial time in recruiting for football and basketball, but especially basketball, because there are still guys out there who are unsigned. Recruits, senior recruits who are unsigned, trying to find a school they want to go to, and they can't go visit college campuses right now. And it's the same way with transfers. Transfers are trying to pick a school that they're going to enroll in, in a month and a half. And they can't go visit schools right now. It's virtual tours. Virtual tour is the, buzzword as far as recruiting goes in the spring of 2020. And this is what recruits are doing now. They're having FaceTime calls and Zoom calls, and they're they're setting up a FaceTime call, and you'll have a coach or a recruiting assistant or somebody carry the iPad around your facilities to show them what you have. And that's what is passing for a recruiting tour right now. And so I was really interested to get Jeff Capel on the phone, as it were, and say, man, how do you do this? How do you recruit like this right now? How are you selling Pitt to guys who can't step foot on campus? And so I thought it was a really interesting interview. Hopefully, if you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or where else do we have it? Stitcher, I think, or Podbean or Libsyn. Still haven't figured out Spotify. I've been trying to get it on Spotify for forever and a day and haven't been able to pull that off yet for some reason. But I mean, wherever you get your podcast, if you subscribe to it, it's in there. There's a conversation with Jeff Capel on recruiting in a pandemic. And if you don't subscribe to the podcast, you should go check it out. That's not here on our YouTube feed because it wasn't a video interview. That these conversation things, I don't know. I'm not to the point yet where I'm comfortable doing that interview sort of face to face over, the laptop or over FaceTime. I like to get guys on the phone. We can just chat. I feel it'd be a little more conversational that way. So that podcast is not on YouTube, but it is available on our podcast feed. And so you should check that out. And, before that, we talked to Tyler, forget that name. I didn't say anything. I didn't even start to mention a name there because I don't like to tease things too far in advance. I'm going too far down this rabbit hole. No, we talked to Latif Grimm and we talked to Pat Bostic. Those were our first couple episodes, and it was a lot of fun talking to those guys and catching up with those guys, reminiscing about their time at Pitt, what they're doing now, and just kind of how they reflect on their Pitt careers. For Pat, 10 years down the road? Pat Bostic, 10 years since he played at Pitt. For Latif Grimm, 20 years since he played at Pitt. It was really interesting, I think, to go down memory lane with those guys. So hopefully you got a chance to check that out. We're going to keep doing that. Even though I'm going to have the radio show coming back, I'm going to do these conversation podcasts on Friday because I've been enjoying it, and hopefully you've been digging it too. So programming going forward. You got this podcast coming out on Wednesdays. Back up. You've got the live stream on Tuesday nights here on the YouTube, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Pantherlaircom. You've got the podcast being released audio on Wednesday mornings. You've got a conversation podcast coming out on Fridays, sometimes Thursdays. I had to release the Capel one early because I thought it was such a good interview. I didn't want to wait. And then you got the radio show on Saturday mornings. So plenty of Pitt talk for you to consume, and on Tuesday nights, participate in. And we'll check in on the comment section here and see what people are talking about. And that's the fun, like I say, of the YouTube live stream. If we have comments popping in all the time. Anthony Tennyson said, do you think Terrell Brown ever played the 4 at Pitt? I think he's been a 5, his whole career. I'm not sure if there have been many times when he's there's not been many times when he has lined up at power forward. I think Terrell Brown has been a center the whole time. See, I get distracted. I start reading ahead on the comments. And we got, Brock Madonic chiming in and Steven Epstein chiming in, and want to get to these guys' comments as well. But Terrell Brown's a 5. Terrell Brown's a center. I think that's his position. That's his best position. It's where he helps the team the most, Anthony. I don't see him ever sliding over to power forward. Brock Madonic says, I was talking to a college basketball expert on Instagram, and he told me he believes William Jefferson will commit within the next 10 days. Have you heard anything on his commitment? I haven't heard of an impending commitment. I know our guy Corey Evans from Rivals.com is tuned in pretty well to the recruitment of William Jefferson. That's the 4-star forward wing prospect out of Erie who reclassified from the 2021 class to the 2020 class. A really good recruit. And Pitt is in pretty good shape with William Jefferson. I'm not sure on his timeline. I know Corey Evans has been keeping track on that a little bit better. He's coming up fast. There's not a lot of time left. He's got him, effectively a month and a half. And that was one of the questions I asked Jeff Capel last week is, look, is there a cutoff? Is there a date where you need to have guys committed so you know what your roster is going to be? And he said, kind of not really. He gives guys the option on that first spring semester, which I think is in May. And that's unlikely to happen now. I think that would all be online anyway. And then, he likes to have all the guys on campus for the second summer semester. And I'm not sure what the dates are on that. I would have to look it up, but I think it's in June, mid-June, I think is when it starts, because I think they're 6-week semesters. So you're trying to get recruits on campus, or you're trying to get your new players on campus by mid-June if you're going to have them take classes, although I think classes are online now. So, everything's all jumbled up, there's so many questions in this situation. And I'm not just talking about the William Jefferson situation or or Pitt basketball, but there's so many different ways things can go right now. There was a basic question asked. We had a chance to talk to Pat Narduzzi on Friday. He had a Zoom call with a bunch of local reporters. And he was asked, could you have players on campus in the fall practicing and getting ready for games if the students themselves, the general student body, was doing all online courses? Could you do that? And he said, yeah, we could do it, no problem. But could you? Not to go too far down the rabbit hole of talking about possible scenarios for this fall, because I think there are about 100, and I don't think anyone has any idea what's going to happen. I certainly don't have any idea what's going to happen. But Yeah, I mean, it's a realistic possibility. It's very realistic that the general student body is going to have online classes in the fall. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if Pitt's leaning that way. I'm sure they're considering that option. But if they do that, can you have football players on campus practicing and getting ready for games? If you can't have students coming to class, or if you choose not to have students coming to class, are you going to play football games? It's stressful right now. For a lot of reasons. One, because we don't know any answers. We don't have any answers. We don't have any certainty. I keep seeing people online saying, we just need to know a timeline. Someone's got to give us an end date. Nobody knows an end date. Nobody knows when this is going to go, or where this is going to go, or how long it's going to go. I see people talking about there aren't going to be concerts until autumn of 2021. I don't say autumn ever. It's odd that I just dropped that in there. I must have seen that in a headline. Who says autumn? There aren't going to be concerts until fall of 2021. But I don't think anyone knows. No one knows what's going to happen. And in the face of that inevitability, or uncertainty, excuse me, in the face of that uncertainty, you start thinking about, I don't want to say worst case scenarios, because the worst case scenario has a whole heck of a lot more to it than just not having football games. But I mean, you start thinking about negative scenarios when it comes to football or sports in general, and those scenarios involve not having the sports. And it becomes stressful there because you A, because of the uncertainty, and B, because of the possibility and potentially likelihood that it's not going to be a very enjoyable fall from a sports perspective. If Pitt is to go online with its courses in the fall, do you really think there are going to be football games played with fans? And I mean, I like the idea of games without fans. I don't even know how viable that is. I don't even know how realistic it is. I mean, I think there's way too many moving parts that it's easier than, or it's far more difficult than just saying, show up, we'll put a TV camera up there and you guys show up and play your game. It's complicated. And this isn't me sitting here saying that I don't think there's going to be football this fall. I don't know if there's going to be football this fall, and neither do you, and neither does anybody. And anybody who wants to say definitively this is going to happen or that's going to happen, I don't know. Somebody's going to end up being right, and they're going to claim that they knew all along, but they didn't. They didn't know. Kind of on a tangent there. We had something that was actually, I don't know, obviously spring football was canceled, right? And so we've been missing spring camp. But the real thing that actually, the first thing as a Pitt football fan, the biggest thing or the most tangible thing you've missed out on thus far was supposed to be this past Saturday with the spring game. It was supposed to be on Saturday at Heinz Field, 5 o'clock kickoff. Remember, it was going to be a nighttime kickoff. It's very exciting. It's going to be something different. And that didn't happen. And I feel like for Pitt sports fans, that's the first sort of tangible thing that didn't happen. That's something you probably would have gone to if you listen to this podcast, if you watch this live stream. It's probably something you would have attended. You'd have gone down to Heinz Field on Saturday night. It was a beautiful day, too. It would have been a great night for a spring game. You probably would have gone down there and enjoyed the evening as much as one can enjoy a spring game. You didn't lose out on having March Madness canceled from a Pitt perspective. You did, just as a sports fan, which I'm sure you enjoy watching March Madness, but I mean, you didn't really, Pitt was never making the NCAA tournament, so you didn't lose out on that. The spring game was really the first thing you've lost, sports-wise, Pitt sports-wise, to this pandemic. I guess, I mean, I shouldn't totally overlook the, other spring sports, baseball, softball. They obviously lost whole seasons, or the bulk of their seasons. And so I don't want to totally sell them short, but spring game is a big thing, and it didn't happen. It was supposed to happen, but I was thinking about it though. And I mean, when was the last memorable spring game? Like memorable for a good reason. The spring games that stick out in my memory are like Todd Graham's year, because it rained. It was miserable. Paul Christ's 2 years. Remember, he was here for 3 years, but he only held 2 spring games, and they were both at high schools. There was one at North Hills or North Catholic. It was North Hills, I think. And I think it rained that day. And then the next year he had it at night at Bethel Park, and it was freezing cold. That was a terrible night. It was a Friday night at Bethel Park, so the traffic was miserable. I mean, traffic was great for me. I live in the South Hills, but it was a Friday night at Bethel Park. It was, I mean, people couldn't get there. It was, traffic on the Parkway and, trying, West Liberty and trying to get out to the South Hills on a Friday night. Not a lot of fun. Conversely, Pat Narduzzi's first spring game, or maybe it was his second, maybe it was 2016. I think it was 2016, was the one at Highmark Stadium, the Riverhound Stadium, and that was beautiful. It was a beautiful day. It was hot. I got a sunburn because I stood outside the whole time because it was so nice out. That stadium's beautiful. That was a great place to be. You'll notice, though, that none of these memories has a darn thing to do with football, because I don't really remember much that we saw football-wise. Todd Graham's year, I think I remember Anthony Gonzalez having a good year as a quarterback and looking like he had promise as a quarterback. And then he went out and got in legal trouble that offseason and came back and played like tight end or H-back or something like that all season. Football-wise, not much else. I know in 2017, everybody said how they could tell from the spring game that Kenny Pickett was the better option. Everybody knew that coming out of the spring game. Of course, except apparently the coaches, according to a lot of fans, felt like Kenny Pickett should have been the guy. But, I mean, what else really positive did you get out of spring games in the past? And I'm not sitting here saying that we should never have spring games. I anxiously anticipate next year's spring game. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun, especially because it might be the next football we actually get. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a fun way to see some guys that you're probably not going to see much of during the season. But I think we always go into spring games hoping for and expecting a lot more than we actually get. I think we want to see how guys look, or see how this guy looks or that guy looks, and we don't usually get that. We don't usually get a real good sense of guys. And I can't think of anything we would have gone into this spring game looking for that we would have actually gotten. Right? I think If you consider the biggest question marks facing this team right now, this Pitt football team, it's the offensive line and the offense as a whole. And there was probably nothing that realistically would have happened in this spring game where you came out of it feeling good about either one of those areas, the offensive line or the offense as a whole. And the offensive line is partially because of the way that Pat Narduzzi chooses to run the spring game. This format where they draft the team. So you have a mix and match offensive line. You don't have the first team offensive line playing together against the defense, and then the second team offensive line playing together. And there have been coaches in the past that have done that, ones versus twos. The first team offense with the second team defense is one team, and then the second team offense and the first team defense is the other team. That's what I think you would like to see. So you get the first team offense against the first team defense, and the second team offense against the second team defense. You mix and match it like that. You mix it, match it that way, and you end up with, I think, a game that has a potential at least to be competitive. You do it the way Pitt has been doing it, particularly with the offensive line, and this is the biggest problem. You mix and match that offensive line when they draft guys, so you don't have, you might get lucky and have a first-team tackle playing next to a first-team guard. Chances are it's not going to happen. And if it does happen, then your first-team guard is definitely not going to be playing next to the first-team center. You're not going to have more than potentially 3 first-team offensive linemen on the same team, or 3 second-team offensive linemen on the same team. They're all going to be mixed and matched around. And that lack of continuity, because they'll practice like 1 or 2 days with that mix, that set, that group, that unit. And with no continuity, those guys just aren't ready to go. And especially not this year when they would be playing against that defensive line, which is, I don't think, without any question, is the strength of the team, is this defensive line. Between talent and depth, they are strong up front on defense. And so you would have, 2 first-teamers, 2 second-teamers, and a third-team offensive lineman all mixed together going against any combination of guys like Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones and Deslin Alexandra and Jalen Twyman and so on and so forth down the line. Good luck with that. You would have a challenge if you had the first team offensive line all playing together going against some combination of Weaver, Jones, Camp, Alexandra, Baldonado, and Morgan and Twyman and what's his name, Kalijah Cansey and Devin Danielson and David Green. I mean, like, the list goes on and on. No matter how you mix and match those guys at the 2D end and 2D tackle spots, they were going to give the offensive line a whole lot of trouble if they were all mixed up. After practicing, through the whole spring camp, the previous 14 practices in one configuration with minor substitutions, to then just completely jumble the group up, I don't have to tell you, you've seen the results over the past few years. It's not good. And it's hard to come away feeling great about your offense when they can't even score more than one touchdown because their offensive line is just getting killed the whole time. You can't run the ball in that kind of situation. You can't pass protect very well. And so you end up these games with like 11 sacks or something like that because the quarterback's not actually getting sacked. Of course, Pat Narduzzi's blowing the whistle on those plays. But it's not an exciting product. You have a better chance of getting defensive touchdowns out of this setting than you do offensive scores. So you weren't going to get great answers to the questions you were most curious about. You might be able to sit there and isolate on one offensive lineman and say, boy, Carson Van Lin looked good in the first half, or Carter Warren had a good third quarter or something like that, but you weren't going to come out of it feeling great. And if somehow that offensive combination did go out and put up a bunch of points, and they did run the ball well, and they did complete a bunch of passes down the field, you could just spend all offseason griping about the defense. I think the reality is, when it comes to these spring games, and spring football in general, it's very rare that you come out of the 15 practices, for those of us on the outside, media, fans, I think it's rare that you come out of the 15 practices with having many of your impressions changed from what they were heading in. There might be a guy or two here or there that emerges. Boy, this guy looked really good. This guy had a really good camp. This guy moved his way up the depth chart. Last year, Phil Campbell moves from safety to linebacker. And he has a really good camp and ends up one of the most, getting an award for being the most improved player on defense. And so you'll have a storyline like that here or there. But if you went into spring camp thinking, offensive line, big question mark, don't know what those guys are going to do, it was very unlikely you would find something or see something that would change your opinion. Because the verdict on this offensive line isn't going to be rendered in April or March. It's not going to be rendered in August. You'll decide your judgment on Pitt's offensive line, and that unit will prove itself or not. I mean, they'll show who they really are with the performance of the offense as a whole in September, October, November, December. And that's, this is why I go back and forth on spring football. I mean, on one hand, it's the only thing you're going to get between the bowl season and the regular season, right? That's all you're going to get. So you cherish it. I mean, cherish is overstating the case a little bit, but you watch as much as you can. You observe as much as you can. You try and talk to as many players and coaches as you can. But then you also understand that a lot of times those observations you may make or conclusions you may draw from spring football or the spring game, they don't always carry over to what you actually see when the season starts. Let's see here. Couple questions coming in basketball-wise before we switch topics here. Royce Beacom says, can we assume Coach Tim O'Toole is not going to Fordham? It seems that way. I don't know. Did Fordham even hire someone? I haven't followed that situation all that closely. I know Tim O'Toole's name was connected to the Fordham opening, but haven't really seen anything there. So I don't think anything's happening there. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's like everything else. Everything's uncertain. Let's see. On to Green 19. Assuming there is a basketball season this year, which new player are you most excited to see play? Ethiel Horton included. And I mean, that makes it easy. It's Ethiel Horton. Transfer from Delaware is supposed to come in and be the guard. to really play next to Xavier Johnson and have a serious impact on this team. And I've talked a lot about how the expectations for Ethiel Horton have gone through the roof. And it's almost a surprising level with Ethiel Horton and where those expectations are, because Jeff Capel has not really pulled any punches. He has not done anything to lower the expectations or temper the expectations for Ethiel Horton. As a matter of fact, he's gone the other way. You think back to some of the things that Capel and the players on the team said during this past season about Ethiel Horton, talking about how Capel told the players that if they could guard Horton in practice, then they would be able to guard anybody in the ACC. There was another time, and this is the example that really stood out to me and continues to stand out to me, is after the Syracuse game at the Peterson Events Center near the end of the season. Capel was asked about how you prepare for Elijah Hughes, a really good player, and Capel had already said that Hughes is, in his opinion, the best scorer in the ACC. And when Capel was asked that, he said, we have a guy who can mimic that in Ethiel Horton. So you have a guy that you've called the best scorer in the ACC, and you're saying that this transfer, Ethiel Horton from Delaware, is able to give you an effective mimicry of what Elijah Hughes can do. I mean, that's high praise, and you're setting the bar really high, and you're setting the expectations really high for what Horton is going to be able to contribute to your team in 2020/2021. I tend to think of Jeff Capel as a pretty measured guy. I think he thinks a lot about what he says. I think he measures his words carefully. I don't think he's prone to hyperbole, I guess is one way to say it. But he's been speaking in those terms regarding Ethiel Horton, which is a little surprising to me. But maybe it raises the expectations because, or maybe it should raise the expectations. I mean, that seems to be how Capel's approaching it. So, I mean, yeah, you talk about which guy do I think is going to, how did you ask the question there? On to Green 19 says, which new player is most exciting to see? I mean, I think it's Horton, because he should be another scoring option that this team needs. I mean, obviously they needed more offense. They needed somebody else who could score, particularly at the guard position. Josh Newark says, from an administrative standpoint, there's no way you can have student athletes performing with students doing distance learning away from campus. Then they turn into employees, not students. Well, Josh, you're going down a long path. that would send us down a long path of talking about student athletes as employees, not students. But yeah, kind of. Brock Madonic says, follow up on William Jeffers. If he ends up committing to Pitt, will he redshirt his freshman year because of his age? I don't know. This is going to be really interesting to see. I mean, right now I think they have two more scholarship spots available. If they get Jeffers, they'll have one more spot. They might fill it maybe with a transfer who has to sit out this year, which would still leave them with 12 guys available. I can't see William Jeffers coming to Pitt and redshirting, but I do wonder about what his role would ultimately be, because he is younger. As Brock said, I mean, he reclassified from the 2021 to 2020 class. So he's a younger guy. He'll get to college wherever he goes to college. He'll get to college as a younger player. And that, it can make it tough. And I think he's a guy who needs to continue to grow. He needs to grow into his body. I don't know what Jeff Capel's plans are for Will Jeffers if he chooses to go to Pitt. But I think it'll be really interesting to see if he ends up redshirting. Or my guess is that he won't redshirt. My guess is that he'll play. I just don't know how significant of a role he'll have as a freshman if he goes to Pitt. Josh Newark says, was the University of Cincinnati ending their soccer program today the canary in the coal mine about whether they think we have a football season this year, or was Cincinnati using the coronavirus as an excuse to axe soccer? I don't know. I don't know what was behind Cincinnati's decision to do that. I don't know if they have plans to bring in another program. I guess they axed the men's soccer program, so you don't get into Title IX concerns as much. When Pitt dropped women's tennis, and they're adding women's lacrosse, they're still able to kind of keep that balance and meet those quotas and meet the requirements. Did they drop soccer because they know they're not going to have football? I don't know. I would have to be in those meetings. I don't know what Cincinnati's rationale was on doing that. I don't know if this has been building up. I think it'll be very interesting to see if over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, we see college athletic departments take a real hard, maybe even uncomfortable look at their budgets, how they spend their money, where they spend their money, and where they need to spend their money, where they best could spend their money. I think that'd be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to watch because you could see more changes. And maybe it's in programs getting cut. Maybe it's in just budget shrinking, that you don't need, a barber shop or a water wall or a slide, a water slide in your cafeteria or something like that. You don't need to drop a helicopter onto a high school field. You can just drive. You can drive to a school. You can drive to a high school to visit a recruit. You don't have to take a helicopter to his high school football field. Nicholas Timperio, the offensive line, going back to the offensive line conversation, the offensive line recruiting needs to start landing more than 2 guys per year. Yeah, it's interesting that volume has been a bit of a problem for Pitt in offensive line recruiting in the past couple years. What it really comes down to with the O-line, though, and I've kind of touched on this a few different times, what it really comes down to with the offensive line is Pitt just has to develop guys. I mean, their 2018 was the last season where they had recruits that they inherited on the offensive line. They had what's the names? Mike Herndon and Connor Dentino. Now, starting with last year, 2019, they were all recruits and players who came to Pitt under Pat Narduzzi, and that's where they'll be again this year. They just got to start. Their guys have to start developing, is what it comes down to. And the offensive line recruiting needs to improve. They need to get good offensive line recruits this year and all this stuff. And yeah, it's important. It'd be great if they went out and got 3 5-star offensive linemen in this class. But it's not going to matter at all if they don't develop the guys they already recruited. Because if they don't develop the guys they already recruited, if they don't develop the players who are already on the roster, then by the time these recruits in the 2021 class are ready to play, it's going to be for a different coaching staff. And I mean, that's not some kind of hot take. I'm not predicting a hot seat. I'm not predicting a coaching change, but it's the reality. If they can't develop their offensive line players better than they did heading into last season, then none of their recruiting right now is going to matter for this coaching staff, because you have to develop your guys. And I mean, they ultimately developed guys like Dentino and Herndon into effective players. They moved this staff I'm talking about, although different offensive line coach, moved Brian O'Neill from tight end to offensive tackle, made him into a 2nd-round draft pick. They've had some success with that, but they have to now. They're now working exclusively with players that they recruited. And they've got to take those players they recruited and develop them. And it's that simple. And we talk about graduate transfers all the time. That's a big topic. I wrote about a graduate transfer offensive lineman this week. A kid named Keldrick Wilson out of Hampton, who has become pretty highly sought after graduate transfer offensive tackle prospect. I think his top 3 right now are Pitt, Indiana, and USC. West Virginia's kind of on the fringe of that group. So, I mean, decent set of schools, set of Power 5 schools in Pitt, Indiana, USC, and West Virginia. It's a good group of schools. And so he's a good player. And yeah, he could come in and play for 1 year like Stefano Millen did, or like, Nolan Alizio did, even though Alizio wasn't really all that great for Pitt last year. And I think there's something to be said for if there's a good offensive lineman out there who can come in and play, a guy with experience like a Millen or, an Alizio or whoever, or this Keldrick Wilson, go get him, because you can make your team better. But at a certain point, you've got to, for lack of a better phrase, you've got to grow your own. You've got to recruit guys, and you've got to develop them, and you've got to succeed with them. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to get enough graduate transfers every year to build an effective offensive line. And you're going to have years where you don't get a good grad transfer at all. Ideally, you would have been in a position last year where you recruited and developed well enough that you'd have offensive tackles ready to play, that even if you go get Nolan Alizio, you don't need to rely on him as much as they did. That kid took more false starts than any other player on offense. And there's no reason he should have kept playing as much as he did, other than they didn't have the depth to replace him. Now, I think, and I've said, best thing going for this offensive line in 2020 is that those guys all have experience. You know what I mean? They're returning Jimmy Morrissey, multi-year starter. Bryce Hargrove started every game last year. Carter Warren started every game last year. Jake Cradle started a bunch of games last year. Gabe Hoy started a bunch of games last year. Carson Van Lin played a lot last year. Played a lot the last 2 years. That's 6 guys. Feel pretty good about the interior with Jimmy Morrissey. If you listened to the podcast a couple weeks ago with Pat Bostic, we talked about this. Jimmy Morrissey at center, Bryce Hargrove at left guard, right guard either Jake Cradle or Gabe Hoy, and then one of your, and then you just got to figure out the tackle positions. But it's guys that you recruited. Guys you're going to have to be able to develop. And that's what you're counting on this year. And even if they get a graduate transfer, you're still going to be counting on developing the guys you recruited. And so they have to continue recruiting good offensive linemen. There's no question about it. But right now, the most important thing for Pitt football in 2020, the most important thing for the most, the success of the most talented team that Pat Narduzzi has had since he got to Pitt, the most important thing is development, coaching. Dave Borbley has to earn a raise this year with how he coaches these players on this roster. Going on through the questions, Colin Towle says, Reese Davis was mentioning having college football in February through May if everything wasn't getting better by August. Yeah, I think, what's his name? Chris Fowler mentioned that as well. I have so many questions about that it's not even funny. I have no idea how that would work. February, March, April, May football. I don't know. I don't know what you would do with guys who want to leave early for the NFL. I don't know what you would do with early enrollees. I don't know what you would do with a season coming up in the fall. If you would have 2 seasons in the same calendar year, I don't know when you would have training camp. I don't know how you would reschedule bowl games. I don't know how you would cancel bowl games and then have the bowl games in like June or something like that. You know what would be cool? You know what would be pretty cool if you could do it? Don't reschedule the bowl games. Play the bowl games. And figure out a system. You have all these conference affiliations. Get your teams, take the teams that were bowl eligible last year and let them get picked into bowls. And play the bowls as like a preseason exhibition season. Play them in December and January. If you can have games in December. If you're not going to be able to, have games, have concerts, have these large groups until like something like December, play the bowl games. Play them as a preseason exhibition. Now, obviously, you're not going to play your playoff games. Save your playoff games for the end of May or whatever it is, June, something like that. Play the bowl games as exhibition games in the preseason. Wouldn't that be fun? I think that'd be fun. I don't know if I'd go, but it'd be fun. You don't have to play the same bowl game that you played a year ago. So we don't have to go to Detroit again. I don't know. Maybe it's just the non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA talking. But I think that'd be an interesting idea. There's still a million questions I would have about how you would play football in February through May. But look, at this point, we're in such unprecedented times that how are you going to, you can't take anything off the table at this point. You can't say like, oh, that's crazy. They've never done it that way before. Guess what, man? We've never done anything. Any of this stuff. We've never done it this way before. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time asks, who do you think is a better running back, A.J. Davis or Vincent Davis? You obviously have characteristics that separate those two guys. Vincent Davis has speed. A.J. Davis is bigger. A.J. Davis is physically built to be an every down running back, but he does not have the ability to... And he's broken some big plays in his time. I'm not going to pretend like he's never had a run longer than 4 yards. He's broken big plays in his time, but he doesn't have that potential to do it every snap, every touch, the way Vincent Davis does. Pitt's running back this season, unless Izzy Abanikanda takes the reins, it's going to be a mix and match of A.J. Davis, Vincent Davis, potentially Todd Sibley, Abanikanda. Those guys are going to mix and match. It's going to be a running back by committee. And you're going to get those exciting plays where Vincent Davis just takes off and goes 60 yards for a touchdown. What you'd like to be able to get is more of the consistent snap to snap, down to down running game, effective running game, like what you had with Darren Hall and Quadri Olson. You could do it with two guys. I wonder what Vincent Davis's ceiling is on how many carries he can realistically get per game at his size. I'm sure he would tell you he can do 30 carries a game. You're not going to do that, though. And if you give A.J. Davis 30 carries a game, you're not going to get a real effective running game out of it. It's going to be a mix and match of those guys. I think there's probably a lot of hope being pinned on Abanikanda because he's the one guy we haven't actually seen yet. You've seen what A.J. Davis can do. You've seen some flashes of what Todd Sibley can do. He's a pretty interesting guy. Particularly that Miami game. We always go back to that one. He had like 50 yards on 4 carries or something like that running out of the Wildcat. He's an interesting mix of size and speed, but I think Abanikanda has probably got a better combination of those things. He's faster. He's probably the fastest back on the team after Vincent Davis. So you gotta hope the freshman can come in and really contribute, but it hurts him to not have spring camp because it's all this time he's not practicing the playbook, which is unfortunate because it probably hurts his chances of getting on the field. It hurts his chances of getting on the field sooner. Let me see here. Dan V says, thanks for making this podcast or whatever you call it. Appreciate it in times like this with little real sports going on. Yeah. And Dan, I say, I've said this a few times. I led off a podcast with this a few weeks ago and I've continued to write about it on Panther-Lair.com that look, and I even had this conversation with somebody on the message boards this week when they said, I reported on a graduate transfer who's considering Pitt. And he said, what does it matter? We're probably not going to even have a season anyway. And like, I get it. I get where you're coming from in that regard. I know. I don't know if there's going to be a season. I really don't. And I don't even know if I'm leaning one way or the other on am I 50-50 on that possibility? I don't even know if I'm 50-50 on the likelihood of being a season. But until we know for sure that there's no season, I'm just going to move forward like it's going to happen. I'm going to keep talking about this team and its outlook for 2020. Because why wouldn't we? I mean, the hell else do you have to do right now, right? I mean, we might as well talk about sports. I'll talk my friend's ear off about fantasy football or fantasy baseball. I'm doing a fantasy baseball draft. We've had it going on for like 2 weeks over email. 1 pick every day. That's great. Because what else do we have to do? If you guys, we could talk about TV or music or something like that. But we might as well talk about sports. We got nothing else going on, right? So I appreciate you tuning in, Dan. I appreciate everybody who checks this out, the live stream and the podcast. Nicholas Temperio points out fewer and fewer basketball players are going to redshirt with the increasing transfers. I think there's some truth to that. Although, I think you still make the best decision for your team and best decision for your player. And I think coaches have to kind of operate assuming that most guys are going to stick with it. Not assuming, well, this guy, is probably going to transfer in 2 years, so I'm definitely not going to redshirt him. I don't think you can look at it like that. I think you've got to, you got to assume that guys are going to be around and guys are going to stick around. And Nicholas also points out that Mike Herndon and Connor Dentino were both recruited as defensive linemen. That's true. Paul Christ recruited those guys to play defensive line. They were there early in their time in Pat Narduzzi. Well, Herndon really kind of bounced back and forth between offensive line and defensive line throughout his time at Pitt and with Pat Narduzzi. And Dentino, went from the defensive line to like playing this weird like jumbo fullback position and really just never played until his last season in 2018. And him and Herndon both became really good run blocking guards. And you give those guys deserve a lot of credit for the success that Pitt had running the ball in 2018. You get 1,000 yard rushers in the same season. It's not just because those backs are good. And we saw, 3 years of Darren Hall, 3 years of Quadri Olson prior to 2018, and they were nice backs, but were they, I mean, would you have projected a 1,000-yard season for both of those guys in the same year? Some of the plays that they made, some of the runs that they made, no, you wouldn't have projected it. And this isn't to take anything away from those two guys. I think they're both very good players. Quadri Olson's still in the NFL. Darren Hall is going to be in a camp, at least, the next time there are camps. But you have to give a lot of credit to Herndon, Dentino, and George Aston, and Jimmy Morrissey. I mean, those four guys had a lot to do with Pitt's running game that in 2018. You got to give a lot of credit to those guys. They deserve it. And you need those kind of step forward performances. This season, you need some of the offensive linemen to emerge a little bit. Let's see here. Pittsburgh Sports All the Time. How much do you think bowl wins help recruiting? I would say this. All right. Now, there's extreme situations. If you go out and you go to the Orange Bowl and you beat, Auburn or something like that, that's big. That's something you can sell on. You go to the the Quick Lane Bowl and beat Eastern Michigan, you're not exactly sending out mailers about that game. I think what a bowl win can really do for you, generally speaking, regardless of the opponent, regardless of the bowl that you're playing in, what a bowl win can do for you is create momentum for the offseason. Positive momentum. And the way I always kind of think of it is, look, it's better to go into the offseason coming off a win than it is coming off a loss. And I think it's really that simple. It's better to go into an offseason coming off a win than coming off a loss. And we've seen Pitt go into the offseason so many times coming off a loss, and it just seems to cast a pall over the whole season, or the whole offseason, excuse me. That it's, the last time you were on the field, you lost the Sun Bowl, whether that's 2008 or 2018. The last time you were on the field, you beat North Carolina. The last time you were on the field, you had a pretty exciting win in Detroit, and that could be 2013 or 2019. There's a lot of similar threads that run through the history of Pitt football. I think it sets the tone to some extent for your offseason. Is it going to help you land are recruits going to commit to you because you beat Eastern Michigan in the Quick Lane Bowl? Probably not, but at least you can say to them, look, we won our bowl game. We're coming out, we're coming off a win, and we are on a winning streak heading into next season. Even if it's only one game, you're on a winning streak heading into next season. Colin Towell says Pitt versus Notre Dame on St. Patrick's Day would be something. You bet you're Irish, you know what it would. That would be incredible. Oh my goodness. Would they have, if the calendar lined up, right, for a February through May schedule, a football season, and the calendar lined up that it actually was the same, St. Patrick's Day when Pitt hosted Notre Dame, I wonder if they would still have the parade downtown. Because if they did, that whole day would be some kind of debauchery, the likes of which it would be incredible. I'll just leave it at that. That would be incredible. We were talking about the running backs. Anthony Tennyson asked about what about the running back Carter, Valik Carter. He's in the transfer portal. He's playing somewhere else this year. So that's not an option unless he wants to come back and be like a walk-on at Pitt. Because I think that's Pat Narduzzi's policy. You go into the portal, fine. If you want to come back, you got to be a walk-on. So you're not going to see Valik Carter at Pitt next year. And if you do, he probably won't be on scholarship. A couple more things. Josh Newark, Pat Narduzzi tweeted today an RBU, Running Back University video that validated my point from a week ago because Quadri Olson wasn't in it. And I saw that. If you didn't see, Pat Narduzzi tweeted out a video about Pitt's history of running backs, and Quadri Olson didn't get included. And I talked about this, when was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, something like that. Josh, you might remember. But I talked about this, that Quadri Olson feels like he could be a forgotten man in Pitt history. Which is unfortunate because he's one of like 6 guys who have 2 1,000-yard rushing seasons in their careers at Pitt. And the other guys are like Tony Dorsett, Dion Lewis, James Conner, LaShawn McCoy, and I think Elliott Walker is the other one. I think. I forget who the other one is. But, you know, and I just sort of feel that as you go forward, his name is going to fade further into obscurity. And it's just funny that, a few days later, Pat Narduzzi tweets out a video that is talking about Pitt's history of running backs and doesn't include him. So it's unfortunate. He should be remembered a little bit better. Richard Tenza says, sorry I joined late. Do you think the COVID thing will have a negative effect on recruiting or positive? Well, it's hard for it to have a positive, except in one regard. I think what's difficult about this situation is you can't have guys on campus. And some schools are recruiting fine through it. Some schools are having no problem recruiting, and they're getting commitments. But I think what you're seeing is... See, man, I have to look at the commitments that schools have gotten, but my gut instinct is that schools are largely getting commitments from guys who are local, because they're guys who have seen their campus already. And Pat Narduzzi talked about this last week when we had a chance to talk with him on the, some local media gathered with him. He talked about how Western Pennsylvania and the state of Pennsylvania is as strong as it's been since he got to Pitt. And I think he's right. I think Western Pennsylvania, this is the best class in Western Pennsylvania in a number of years. It's the best defensive line class in Western Pennsylvania in a long time. It's the best I've ever seen. Just with three guys, Elliott Donald, Nakai Johnson, and Dorian Ford. And so Narduzzi was pointing that out because while recruiting, it hurts to not be able to have kids on campus. You've also gotten a lot of these guys on campus already. So you might not be getting spring visits out of Elliott Donald or Dorian Ford or Donovan McMillan or Stephon Hall or Khalil Dinkins. You're not getting those guys on campus now, but you've already had them on campus. And I think you're seeing kids commit to schools that they've already visited, which could ultimately help Pitt. Depending on how long this dead period goes, if there are recruits who want to commit before the season starts, they want to commit in the summer or before the summer, Pitt's in good shape with them because they've already visited, if the dead period continues on. So I'm not going to call this a positive, in any respect, recruiting or otherwise. I think that's the one way it could potentially work in Pitt's favor. But I think given the choice, the coaches would still rather have open recruiting season and be able to have guys on campus for visits. All right, we'll take our last question here from Royce Beacom. Would you consider having a Pitt guest with you in this interactive forum? You could filter and select which questions and comments to pass on to the guest. That's interesting. I would have to see how to work it where I don't know if I did a Zoom or a FaceTime or if I could do it on YouTube with multiple, hosts. I'm not sure how that would work. I would have to look into the technology side of it. For now, Royce, I think we'll just stick with where we have our Friday podcast. And this week's guest is a great one. I'm going to tease it. I'm not gonna say who it is. You're gonna have to wait and see on Friday. But our guest this week, you're gonna really like it. It's not Tyler Palco. I know I slipped and said Tyler earlier in the podcast when I was talking about the guests, but it's not Tyler Palco that we're talking to this week. It's a really good guest. It's a really good conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I'm pretty excited for you to hear it. All right, now the last question. Jordan Klein says, does Paris Ford deserve more national respect? Yeah, he does, and he'll get it. If he plays again, if he has another really good season, he'll get it. And if Pitt has success, he'll get his respect. Sometimes when you look at the guys that are getting a lot of respect nationally, it sure helps to be on a successful team. We'll just say that. And Dale Gribble, one last comment. A Paris Ford interview would be dope. Yeah, talking to Paris will be fun. We're just not getting a lot of access right now to the Pitt players. We're hoping to talk to more of them. I want to talk to them on the Friday podcast. I think that would be fun on our conversation podcast. But it's, guys are all over the place right now. It's not always easy to track them down, and we'd like to talk to more. Hopefully we're able to talk to more. It was good to talk to Pat Narduzzi last week. Hopefully you saw some of that content. You should subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. I don't have the link on the screen here, but I think or on the video feed, but I think below you can see an option to subscribe. You should do that somewhere down there. It's on that side or that side. I'm not sure. But you subscribe youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then you can get updates when we post videos. We put up a good Pat Narduzzi video last week. A lot of other videos, our podcasts obviously go up there. The live streams go up there all the time. You can rewatch if you miss one. And make sure you check out the website too, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You say there's nothing happening in sports right now. I say, do you know about recruiting? Because recruiting is happening in sports right now. And it might be the biggest thing that's happening in sports right now. It might be the only thing that's happening in sports right now. And so we, unlike a lot of people in sports media, we've got a lot to write about. We've got a lot to talk about. And that's what we're doing at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com. And when you're reading Panther-Lair.com, have one of these. The non-trademark infringement Alma-Mater IPA from Voodoo Brewery. It's a great brewery, Western Pennsylvania. It's Meadville. Come on, man. You got to support the economy in Meadville. If you're going to support the economy anywhere, it should be Meadville, right? Voodoo. Check them out. They're awesome. Pitt fans, Pitt alums. Come on. What is there to lose here? It's a delicious beer. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Thanks to everybody on the live stream tonight. It was a lot of fun having a conversation. Tell a friend that we do this every Tuesday night. It's fun to have these conversations, right? And we talk about Pitt sports. Where else are you going to go for a Pitt sports conversation? So tune in next Tuesday. We'll be back 8:30. You can get the podcast on Wednesday mornings. And then, of course, keep an eye out on Friday morning. We got a good guest coming. You're going to like it on the podcast. So check that out. Go to the website, Panther-Lair.com. And, and the radio show, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., 93.7 The Fan, Panthers Insider, will be there as well. So lots of places to talk Pitt sports and have that conversation. So thanks again for tuning in tonight. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.